And then to pass, 1 second, to pass the slide.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wait, but then.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, super.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, all right. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for being here and taking the time to listen to my presentation. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you as well for the people who are in the room with me. So before I start my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the co-authors in this paper. This paper is titled "Lesbian Coaches in Sport: Creating Alternative Orientations." So I'm together with Dylan Landy, and Ingrid Hinojosa Alcalde, Ana Villanova Solé, and Susana Solé Prat. So first of all, I'd like to thank people who have inspired me, who have been with me along my journey. So first of all, on the left-hand side of the picture, you have Ana Villanova, then Ingrid Hinojosa, and Susana Solé. Those three are my supervisors at INEF, which is the university where I'm doing my PhD. It stands for the National Institute of Physical Education of Catalonia. And then we have the LGBTIQ plus Physical Education and Sport Network. So it's basically a group of universities within Spain. So the north of Spain, Catalonia, Valencia, Andalusia, Madrid, and other autonomous communities that we do some studies about different groups within the LGBTIQ plus community, as well as international collaborations. The second person I'd like to thank is Matilda Moaba, which is the woman you have on the right-hand side of the slide. Unfortunately, she's not with us anymore, but she's one of the strongest women I've ever met. I had the opportunity to work together with her for a year and a half in the National Organization for Women, Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation in Lusaka, Zambia. And apart from being the CEO of the organization, she also served as the co-chair in the International Working Group of Women in Sport. And my time with her was incredible. I learned a lot, and we basically worked on projects aimed at fostering gender equality for mainly girls and women in Lusaka and Zambia and other countries within Africa. And then the last person I'd like to thank is Ryan Storr. So when I had to decide where I wanted to come to do my international stay, I was having a look at different academics and different scholars, and when I came across Ryan, I knew I had to come to Australia. So I think Ryan embodies a lot of things that I'm passionate about, but more specifically his approach to action-based research, as well as his work with different groups of the community. And so he has also opened up opportunities for me to come to different universities. So yeah, I'm looking forward to spending time with him in Melbourne. Right, so this is the outline of my presentation, which it will last for about 20 minutes. So first, I'll briefly situate myself and my work. Then I'll talk about the third article of my thesis. I'll provide a bit of background and theory. Then I'll go on to the methods, and then I'll finish with findings, discussion, and the future. Right, so let's get started. A bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Barcelona, in Spain. I'm passionate about sport, movement, and inquiry since I was very young. I played on the Spanish national basketball team for 4 years. And then I also coached mainly basketball and tennis in several countries. And then when I finished my bachelor's degree, I moved abroad. And then I worked in different fields within sport in different countries. So sport for development, sport for all, or competitive sport in Spain, UK, Denmark, and different countries in Africa. And then when I came back to Spain about 4 years ago, I started my academic journey, which is something that I always wanted to do. And currently I'm in my 3.5 year of my PhD about sexual diversity in sport. I've also been teaching sport management and tourism and leisure management at the Business School and SET in Barcelona, Spain. And I'm also in the board of the main international, national, and local LGBT sport organizations. So the first one is the Federation of Gay Games. The second one is ADI LGBT, which is basically the Iberian Sports Association. And then Panteras Grogas, which is the biggest LGBT sport club in Spain. Okay, so just to provide you with a little bit of background information about the topic. So sports institutions are highly gendered and heterosexualized places where often LGBTIQ plus persons have a complicated history. However, studies about lesbian women in sport have historically focused on the experiences of athletes or physical educators, with limited attention placed on the experiences of coaches. What the previous research have illustrated is that lesbian coaches face double discrimination because of their gender and their sexuality that has resulted in harassment, limited opportunities, and a need to manage their sexual identities. So more specifically in Spain, research on women coaches have reinforced the previous literature and found that women coaches and lesbian coaches have different issues around sexism, poor employment conditions, and multiple barriers to advance their coaching careers. In addition, there's a prevailing cultural ethos in Spain that coaching experiences in elites or in high-level sport hold higher value or status than experiences in sport promoting settings. So what do we add with that study? How can we expand the previous studies and the literature with that study? So first of all, research on lesbian coaches has largely centered on the women's sexual identity and their experiences of male-dominated and heterosexual spaces. There's little research that we're aware of that considered how these experiences are related to the broader literature in the field that emphasize the importance of coaching identity, as well as how the women coaches engage in learning. So the broad focus of this paper was to consider how lesbian coaches' experiences affect their coaching identities, also which sports spaces are more or less conducive for their learning. So in relation to the theory, we're using queer phenomenology from Ahmed. So basically, phenomenological inquiry has traditionally, historically focused on a person's embodied experiences in the world, so both body and mind. Queer phenomenology extends on the different waves of the phenomenology by adding a critical, spatial, and a queer perspective. So Ahmed rethinks how the orientation or the direction within spaces can affect, limit, or enhance is twofold what the body can do. Also, Ahmed is interested in creating spaces to produce these orientations as a way to open the world up for new possibilities. So for us, queer phenomenology has offered a lot of tools to explore the intersections of bodies, spaces, and social relations of the lesbian coaches. So what do we mean by that? Let's plug in queer phenomenology. So first of all, men's sport has been dominated by masculine and heterosexual orientation. As such, often lesbian women have been out of line and therefore disorientated within men's sporting spaces. Given that they are out of line in these spaces, lesbians have been negatively affected and limited in what they can do. For example, with advancement opportunities, a lack of trust from the organization, or a lack of security. Yeah, lesbian women are also affected to build supportive networks with other often lesbian women in order to remain in sport spaces. So the specific purpose of this paper is to explore the lesbian coaches' experiences in different sporting orientations and how those orientations affects their ability to learn as well as to develop their coaching identity in Spain. So as for the methods and the design and the data collection, we used a qualitative conversational inquiry to explore the lesbian coaches' experiences in relation to affective elements like the feelings, perceptions, and motivations. I interviewed 16 cisgender lesbian coaches in Spain that were recruited through social media adverts as well as snowballing. Each coach participated in a semi-structured interview that lasted between 90 and 120 minutes. And the interviews were both conducted in person as well as online. So for the methods, I've been in the University of Queensland with Dylan, and I had the opportunity to learn about new ways of analyzing the data. And those 5 steps, as you can see in the slide, are the steps that we basically follow to analyze data and to write up the findings of the study. As I'm going through each of them, the first step was dialectical analysis. So basically, what we did is that we identify conflicts in the data and then identify the opposite poles of these conflicts. For example, one of the conflicts was vision of sport. And then the 2 opposite poles were sport for competition versus sport as holistic. Another conflict was lesbian coach perception. And then the 2 opposite poles were butch versus women. The second step was typological coding. So basically, with typological coding, we use the predefined codes, so the opposite poles that we identify before, and then we develop a code book, and we went again to analyze the data and tag all the excerpts that were connected to these codes. So for example, we found sport for competition, lesbian coaches as butch, lesbian coaches as women, or alternative sports. The third step was code mapping. So basically, code mapping is used to identify the relationships and the connections between the coded data. So what we did is that we went through all the excerpts of the data and we had a look at the tensions, whether they were connected or even interconnected with other excerpts to see whether we could create broader categories. So some of the examples are social relationships, resisting the butch predator label, advancement opportunities, and intersectional spatial cultures. Then step 4 was theming the data, which basically involves developing themes and using writing as inquiry to interpret their meaning, so to make sense of the data. And most people think as writing up the initial themes in a way to present a coherent story to the reader. So those initial themes were negative experiences in men's and competitive sport, alternative sport develops coaching identity, and renewed vision for inclusive sport. Last step was abductive analysis. So in this step, we considered the findings in relation to our insights, so our hunches and experiences, the theoretical framework, as well as the connection to the literature. So basically, with abductive analysis, it helped us to redefine the themes into the 3 main findings of our study that were personal disorientations, I can't prove it, but I feel it. The second one, reorientations, developing coaching identities in alternative sport. And then the third one, producing these orientations, creating ways to make sport more inclusive. So in relation to trustworthiness, the 3 main elements that I'd like to touch upon are transparency, reflexivity, and acknowledgement. Right now, I don't have time to go in depth into the 3 elements, but we have purposely take a good effort to explain the design and the methods of this research as transparent as possible. And in relation to reflexivity, we acknowledge that my supervisors, Dylan as well, we have affected the data to some extent. And we also acknowledge that our study has some limitations, which I'll be more than happy to discuss further at the end of the presentation. So let's go on to the finding 1, which is personal disorientation. I can't prove it, but I feel it. So most of the women coaches, they saw opportunities in men's sport or competitive sport because of the perceived quality of the experiences that they would get as coaches in those spaces. However, many of the women coaches in our study had negative experiences in those spaces that were orientated towards competition. For example, they had poor social relationships, lack of advancement opportunities. And then one of the main reasons why they also felt like out of place is because often lesbian coaches would be seen as butch, so too masculine, as well as a child predator, as opposed to being a woman. For example, if we have a look at Margaret's quote, she mentioned, "As a lesbian, I am considered butch, and I don't identify with that. I like feeling like a woman, more sensitive and caring. You know, here I had a role within a man's world." So many of the lesbian coaches in our study, they were seen as butch, and as a result, they tried to resist the lesbian label in many different ways. So, for example, some of the women coaches would change the clothes that they would wear in sports coaching to align more to gender traditional roles. Some of the coaches would bring their partner to the sports coaching space, so then they would align to the so-called monogamous or traditional relationship. And yes, so lesbian coaches also they felt that the advancement opportunities were often limited because they were women or because they were lesbians. However, even if they felt it, they didn't have proof. They couldn't prove it. So, for example, if we have a look at Samantha's quote, she said, "I started to think and felt it was my sexual orientation or being a woman. Well, probably both. I don't have the evidence, but I feel it. If I'm a coach, I'm the face of the national team. I doubt they would allow a lesbian to be the face, but I have no proof." So often, Samantha, in this case, she has no proof that her advancement opportunities in coaching were due to her gender or sexual orientation. However, she could feel it. And most of the lesbian coaches in our study felt that the advancement opportunities within coaching were partially due to their gender or their sexual orientation. So the main insights of finding 1, first of all, men's competitive sports had an orientation towards winning, high performance, and traditional gender and sexuality norms. Second, lesbian women coaches felt disorientated in these spaces and had negative experiences as a result. On one hand, affect of these disorientations meant that lesbian coaches were limited in advancement opportunities and identity development. Also, affect of these disorientations was building social relationships with other women and lesbian coaches. So as a result, these women often left these spaces to pursue coaching opportunities in alternative sport spaces, which lead us to the second main finding, which is reorientations, developing coaching identities in alternative spaces. So women who left men's sport or highly competitive spaces and gone to alternative sport spaces, they had a different experience. Those alternative spaces were all of them led by women. They were more diverse, and they were less competitive sports or minority sports. But one of the most relevant aspects of these alternative spaces is that the vision of the sport was different to the orientation that were in the men's or highly competitive space. It was a vision of sport that was focused more about values, inclusivity, and education. For example, Frida said, I have a great relationship with the president of the federation. She has been a role model for me. She trusts me and I trust her. She asked me to do workshops about values in sport because she knows the volume of emotional work and teaching about values in grassroots sport. So in this case, Frida indicated that she had a great relationship with the president of the federation. She also felt trusted, and this culture of trust that empowered her to develop a coaching style that it was more related to values, inclusivity, and education. So as a result of women coaches being in these alternative spaces, they felt more valued, they felt more recognized, and they felt more aligned with their coaching identity and their passions. Another example is from Georgia. She explained that she was fed up in her previous sport club because it was overwhelmingly male dominated and she didn't get along with the male coaches. However, everything changed with Olivia. She is a very powerful at all levels and has been an inspiration for me. Her leadership is very calm and the atmosphere is welcoming. We are friends inside and outside the club. Lastly, she said, I feel like I can finally develop the coaching style I have always wanted to. So most of the women coaches that transition to an alternative sport space, they had this experience. And from this quote, from Georgia's quotes, it's important to highlight the transformational power of the leadership that Olivia had because she felt trusted, she felt empowered, but more importantly, she felt like she could finally develop a coaching style that was more aligned to her values and approach. So the main insight of finding two are that alternative sports were women-led spaces that had a different orientation, focus on education, values, and inclusivity. So this produced effects on the women coaches of feeling valued, trusted, and empowered as their bodies were also aligned to the broader educative orientation. This had positive effects on the development of their coaching identities and also helped them explore and learn new approaches to coaching. As a result, these experiences also aided in developing deeper and more meaningful social connections across a variety of sport contexts. So this leads us to the final result, which is producing these orientations, creating ways to make sport more inclusive. So because of the women coaches left men's and competitive sport and were and experienced a different coaching identity in alternative sport spaces, they could then go to other spaces and make positive changes. For example, However, not all the coaches' ideas or approach were equally well accepted in different clubs. The experience of Amapola reflects this. She said, I always try to instill values to the players. Every month we work on a value and the players had to make a drawing and how they saw and applied that value in their lives. However, families and male colleagues would come to me and say, why are you doing this? Or my kids are here to play sport. It was hard. So Amapola's quote is very interesting because Amapola had an orientation that was focused on education, values, and inclusivity. However, being in a highly male-dominated sport, as well as competitive, her orientation was not in line with the other male coaches and the families even. So therefore, Amapola, by being in this space, she also produced these orientations that were necessary to make changes in those sport spaces. Yet, as I mentioned, most of the women coaches that transitioned to alternative sport spaces, they were able to make changes in different spaces. So, for example, they went back to men's competitive sport. They went to the private sector, and they developed their own sport clubs. For example, this is the example of Gianna. She said, then I went back to the sports federation 3 years ago to lead the Equality Commission. And after 20 years, I walked in as a figure that was a reference because I created a model and a sporting style of beach tennis that was completely new. I came back with a different DNA as a woman, as a lesbian, with the objective of gender equality, inclusive language, and trying to do things in another way and from another perspective. So the main insights of finding three are, first of all, that lesbian coaches with an educative approach produce these orientations in alternative, competitive, men's, as well as the private sector sporting spaces. Secondly, some of these disorientations also resulted in advancement opportunities, greater diversity, as well as collaboration across different sectors. However, some disorientations also produce conflicts and resulted in resistance to values or educational approaches. So as for the discussion, there's a prevailing cultural belief in Spain that quality coach development is best suited in male and or highly competitive sports. Yet, the quality coaching experiences often relies on being afforded appropriate opportunities to engage in workplace tasks to learn about these responsibilities. So if we consider that lesbian women were not afforded these opportunities, but rather they had negative experiences, they reported very little and limited learning and development in men's and or highly competitive sports spaces. So alternative sports spaces, on the other hand, treated sport as a site of learning and were better aligned to the lesbian coaches' vision and approach of sport. And as a result, alternative sport spaces were better suited for lesbian coaches to develop their craft and coaching identity that was related to their values. And finally, these women used the reorientation in their coaching approach to integrate topics around values and diversity in other spaces. So moving forward, what was positive so far? As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I learned different ways to analyze data with Dylan based on the 5 steps that I mentioned. My plans for Australia, I've been to Queensland, the University of Queensland in Brisbane. Now I'm at Griffith University for another couple of weeks. Then I'll be in Western Sydney University, and then finally Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. In my future, this year, I want to finish my PhD by the end of the year, and then I would like to work in Australia around LGBTIQ plus diversity, more broadly, sports coaching, as well as intersection between research and activism. So this is it. If you have any questions, I would be very happy to talk about it. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Going to stop recording now, and we can have our Q&A.